Jay had spent most of his life chasing something that always stayed just out of reach: approval. It wasn't something anyone had clearly demanded from him, nor was it written as a rule he consciously chose to follow. Yet somehow, it had become the invisible force shaping nearly every part of his life. It guided his words, influenced his decisions, and quietly dictated the direction of his path. At some point, without even realizing it, he had begun to believe that being accepted was the same as being fulfilled. Every day, this belief played out in subtle ways. When he spoke, he carefully measured his tone, making sure it sounded agreeable. When someone expressed an opinion, he instinctively aligned himself with it, even if a part of him disagreed. When faced with a decision, he didn't just think about what he wanted, he thought about how it would be perceived. It became automatic, almost like breathing. He didn't stop to question it because, for a long time, it worked. People liked him. They described him as easygoing, polite, and understanding. He was someone others felt comfortable around because he rarely challenged them, rarely created tension, rarely disrupted the flow. In a world where conflict often created distance, Jay had mastered the art of avoiding it altogether. And because of that, he was accepted almost everywhere he went. But what no one saw, what Jay himself barely understood, was the cost of that acceptance. Inside, there was a quiet disconnect that grew stronger over time. It wasn't loud enough to demand attention at first. It showed up as a faint sense of unease, a feeling that something was slightly off. Conversations sometimes felt rehearsed. Decisions sometimes felt borrowed. Even moments that should have felt meaningful carried a strange emptiness, as though they were missing something essential. At first, he ignored it. He told himself this was normal. Everyone adjusted themselves to fit in. Everyone cared about what others thought. That's what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. That's what it meant to succeed, to build relationships, to move forward in life. He convinced himself that this quiet discomfort was just part of the process. But the feeling didn't go away. Instead, it lingered. It followed him through his days, showing up in moments when he least expected it. It was there when he agreed to something he didn't believe in. It was there when he laughed at something he didn't find funny. It was there when he stayed silent, even though something inside him wanted to speak. Each time, the feeling left behind a small trace, a crack that slowly spread beneath the surface. Over time, those cracks began to connect. One evening, after a day that had been completely ordinary on the outside, Jay found himself sitting alone in silence. There was nothing remarkable about the day. It had been filled with conversations, small accomplishments, and interactions that most people would consider positive. He had done everything right. He had been agreeable, helpful, and well received. And yet, as he sat there, he felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't hit him like a wave. It was quieter than that, steady, persistent, impossible to ignore. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in his mind. Every moment felt distant, like scenes from a story that didn't quite belong to him. That's when the thought came, simple but heavy: why doesn't any of this feel real? He didn't have an answer. For the first time, he didn't try to distract himself from the question. He didn't push it away or replace it with something more comfortable. He let it stay. And as it stayed, it began to grow. More questions followed. When was the last time I said something I truly believed, without changing it first? When was the last time I made a decision just because it felt right to me? When was the last time I felt completely honest, not just with others, but with myself? The silence that followed those questions was louder than any answer. It was in that silence that something began to shift. Jay started to notice patterns he had never fully seen before. He became aware of how often he paused before speaking, mentally adjusting his words to fit expectations. He noticed how his personality seemed to change depending on who he was around. He realized that many of his goals, the ones he thought were his own, were influenced by what would be respected, admired, or approved by others. It was as if he had been living multiple versions of himself, none of them entirely real. This realization didn't bring immediate clarity. Instead, it brought discomfort, a deep, unsettling feeling that was hard to put into words. It made him question things he had always taken for granted. But perhaps the most difficult part of all was this: seeking approval had worked. It had protected him from rejection. It had helped him build connections. It had allowed him to move through life without creating conflict or tension. In many ways, it had made things easier. And that made it harder to let go. Because how do you walk away from something that has been keeping you safe? That question stayed with him. As the days passed, his awareness grew stronger. He began catching himself in real time, mid-conversation, mid-decision, mid-reaction. He would feel the familiar urge to agree, to adjust, to smooth things over. But now, instead of acting on it automatically, he noticed it. That awareness changed everything. It didn't immediately change his actions, but it created a space, a small gap between the impulse and the response. And in that space, he began to see the truth. The truth was that his fear of disapproval was controlling him. It dictated what he said and what he didn't. It influenced what he pursued and what he avoided. It kept him within boundaries that felt safe but limiting. It shaped his identity in ways he had never questioned before. And the more he saw it, the harder it became to ignore. There were moments when this realization frustrated him. He would look back at situations and think, why didn't I just say what I meant? Or, why did I agree to that when I didn't want to? The questions became more frequent, and the answers were always the same. Because he wanted to be accepted. That desire had become so deeply rooted that it felt like a part of who he was. But for the first time, he began to question it. Was it really who he was? Or was it something he had learned? That distinction mattered more than he realized, because if it was something he had learned, then it was something he could unlearn. That idea didn't come with immediate confidence. It came with uncertainty. Letting go of approval felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory, where the rules were unclear and the outcomes unpredictable. What if people didn't like him anymore? What if he said something wrong? What if he lost the connections he had built? The fear was real, and it didn't disappear overnight. But alongside the fear, something else began to grow, a quiet curiosity. What would it feel like to be completely honest? What would it feel like to make a decision without thinking about approval? What would it feel like to just be? These questions didn't demand immediate answers. They simply opened a door. And once that door was open, it couldn't be closed. Jay didn't suddenly change everything about his life. There was no dramatic moment where he flipped a switch and became a completely different person. Instead, the change began in small, almost invisible ways. It started with awareness. With noticing. With pausing. There were moments when he almost said what he usually would, but stopped. Moments when he felt the urge to agree, but hesitated. Moments when he recognized the pattern and chose, even briefly, not to follow it. Those moments were small, but they mattered. Because each one was a step away from the invisible cage he had been living in. And even though he was still inside it, something had changed. He could see it now. He could feel its boundaries. He could recognize the ways it shaped his thoughts and actions. And most importantly, he could no longer pretend it wasn't there. That awareness didn't free him instantly, but it gave him something he had never had before, a choice. For the first time, Jay began to understand that approval was not something he needed to survive, it was something he had trained himself to depend on. And if he had trained himself into it, then slowly, patiently, he could train himself out of it. That realization didn't remove the fear, but it gave him a direction. He didn't need to become someone else. He didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to start being honest, first with himself, and then with the world around him. That path wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. Required him to face parts of himself he had ignored for a long time. It required him to accept that not everyone would approve of him, and that was okay. But even with all the uncertainty, there was something about it that felt right. Something that felt real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Because deep down, Jay was beginning to understand a truth that would change everything. Approval might make life easier, but it would never make it meaningful. And meaning, real, lasting meaning, was something he was finally ready to find. The cage wasn't gone yet, but it was no longer invisible. And that was where freedom began. The realization had come quietly, almost unnoticed at first, but once it settled, it refused to leave. Jay had seen the pattern. He had recognized the invisible cage. And now, whether he liked it or not, he could no longer go back to living unconsciously inside it. But awareness, as powerful as it was, came with a cost. Because once you see the truth, you are faced with a choice: remain the same and live with the discomfort of knowing, or change, and face the uncertainty that comes with it. Jay stood at that exact point, and the truth was, he wasn't ready. Not fully. There were moments when he felt a surge of determination, when he believed he could break free from the need for approval completely. But there were just as many moments when the old patterns pulled him back in, quietly, subtly, almost effortlessly. It wasn't a battle he could win in a single day. It was something deeper than that. It was a rewiring. The first thing Jay began to understand was that seeking approval wasn't just something he did, it was something he had become used to feeling. It gave him a sense of control, a sense of safety, even a sense of identity. When people approved of him, he felt grounded. When they didn't, or when he imagined they wouldn't, he felt unsettled. So when he started changing his behavior, it wasn't just his actions that felt different. His entire emotional system reacted. The first few times he chose honesty over approval, it didn't feel empowering. It felt wrong. His mind immediately went into defense mode, questioning everything. You shouldn't have said that. That sounded too direct. Now they might think differently about you. These thoughts came quickly, almost automatically, like echoes of an old system trying to pull him back into place. And for a while, they worked. There were moments when Jay would revert, slipping back into agreement, softening his words, reshaping himself just enough to feel safe again. And each time, there was a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because the tension disappeared. Disappointment because he knew he had abandoned himself again. That internal conflict became a constant presence that was uncomfortable, exhausting, and at times, deeply frustrating. But something important was happening beneath the surface. Even when he slipped, he noticed it. And that awareness meant the pattern was losing its invisibility. Days turned into weeks, and Jay began to approach the process differently. Instead of trying to change everything at once, he focused on understanding. He asked himself questions, not to judge, but to explore. Why do I feel the need to be liked in this moment? What am I afraid will happen if I'm honest? Is that fear actually real, or just familiar? These questions didn't always have clear answers, but they created space between his instinct and his response. And in that space, something new began to grow. Choice. For the first time, Jay wasn't reacting automatically. He was pausing, considering, deciding. And even when he chose the old pattern, it was no longer unconscious. It was temporary. That shift, though subtle, was powerful. Because change doesn't begin with action, it begins with awareness followed by intentional choice. One of the most difficult parts of Jay's journey came when his change started affecting the people around him. At first, the reactions were small. A slight pause in conversation when he expressed a different opinion. A subtle shift in tone when he said, no, instead of, yes. A moment of surprise when he didn't immediately agree. These reactions were enough to trigger his old fears. See? This is why you shouldn't change. This is why it's safer to just go along with things. For a moment, he considered going back. But then something unexpected happened. Nothing else followed. No rejection. No conflict. No collapse of relationships. Just, normal life continuing. That realization hit him harder than any fear ever had. Because it showed him that most of the consequences he had imagined weren't real, they were assumptions. Over time, the reactions became more noticeable. Some people seemed less comfortable around him. Others questioned his change. A few even pulled away slightly, as if unsure how to interact with this version of him. At first, this hurt. Jay had spent so long building his identity around being liked that any shift in that dynamic felt like loss. But instead of reacting immediately, he observed. He paid attention to how these changes made him feel, not just in the moment, but afterward. And what he noticed surprised him. Even when interactions felt slightly uncomfortable, he felt more at peace afterward than he ever had before. Because for once, he wasn't replaying conversations in his head, wondering what he should have said. He had already said it. He had already been honest. And that honesty brought a kind of closure he had never experienced before. At the same time, new patterns began to emerge. In some conversations, his honesty created depth. People responded with their own genuine thoughts. Discussions became more real, less filtered, more meaningful. These moments stood out, because they felt different. They felt alive. Jay began to realize that by always seeking approval, he hadn't just been limiting himself, he had been limiting his connections. He had been interacting through a version of himself that wasn't fully real, and as a result, his relationships had been built on partial truths. Now, as he showed up more honestly, the quality of those connections began to shift. Some faded. Some stayed the same. And some became stronger than ever before. This was one of the most important lessons he learned. Not everyone will stay when you stop seeking approval, but the ones who do will see you for who you actually are. And that kind of connection is worth far more than surface-level acceptance. As time passed, Jay's focus began to change. At the beginning of his journey, he had been focused on not seeking approval. But now, he was focused on something deeper. Understanding himself. He started paying attention to what he actually liked, what he believed, what mattered to him. He explored his own preferences without filtering them through others' expectations. At first, this felt unfamiliar. He wasn't used to making decisions purely for himself. But slowly, it became more natural. And with that came a growing sense of clarity. He began to understand that approval had never been the goal. It had been a substitute. A way of filling a gap he hadn't fully recognized. The real need had always been something else. Self-acceptance. And the more he aligned his actions with his true thoughts and feelings, the more that acceptance grew. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with a sudden moment of realization. It built quietly, over time, through consistent honesty. Through choosing himself in small moments. Through standing by his decisions, even when they weren't understood. Through allowing himself to exist without constantly adjusting. And one day, without even realizing when it happened, Jay noticed something had changed. He was no longer overthinking every interaction. He was no longer replaying conversations in his head. He was no longer measuring his worth based on reactions. He was simply living. That didn't mean he had become fearless. There were still moments of doubt. Still situations where the old urge to seek approval surfaced. But now, those moments felt different. They no longer controlled him. They were just thoughts, passing, temporary, manageable. And in their place was something far more stable. Confidence. Not the kind that demands attention or seeks validation. But the kind that comes from knowing yourself. Trusting yourself. Respecting yourself. Jay had spent so much of his life trying to be accepted by others that he had never stopped to accept himself. Now, that had changed. And with that change came a sense of freedom he had never experienced before. The freedom to speak without overthinking. The freedom to act without constant validation. The freedom to exist without performing. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that made all the difference. One evening, much like the one where everything had first started to shift, Jay found himself sitting alone again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. It was calm. He thought back to who he used to be, the version of himself that constantly adjusted, constantly filtered, constantly sought approval. And instead of judgment, he felt understanding. Because that version of him had been trying to stay safe. It had done what it knew. But now, he knew more. And because of that, he could choose differently. As he sat there, one final realization settled in, clear and undeniable: seeking approval had never been about others. It had always been about how he saw himself. And now that he had changed that, everything else had followed. The cage was gone. Not because someone opened it for him, but because he finally realized, it had never been locked.